mostly for the benefit of Senator Rahm. S62 is an issue that this committee is very well aware of and have been the lead supporters of. Its history was very briefly one of the reasons. I didn't ask you to be a sponsor, but I could have easily, you could have understood, and maybe you would have signed on. But everybody else has been involved in it, and Senator Lyons is on because it was her idea originally. She wanted to give a tax credit to remote workers to encourage them to move to Vermont, but she had only suggested $200, and we bumped it to $10,000. So, but give credit where credit's due. Anyhow, Senator Brock, welcome back. It looks like you've got a little progress on your IT issue there.
Well, I've hit it twice with a pretty large hammer, and so it's a little bit better than it was before.
Good, good. Okay, so this bill tries to codify and merge the two programs of the remote worker and the relocated worker. Remote worker is essentially somebody who works for an out-of-state, continues to work for an out-of-state company but lives in Vermont. A relocated worker is somebody who moves to Vermont and works from out of state, works remotely in Vermont for a Vermont firm. But I think we've talked about it a little bit before. I think I'm ready to move with the help of the commissioner as to the changes in the bill as proposed. This is another one where we just put the bill in as it passed out of committee last time as a placeholder. It doesn't mean we're wedded to all of those ideas. And I know the commissioner has mentioned a few concerns and improvements she'd like to see. So I'll do that with a statement of appreciation to the administration to turn this into a permanent program with my feeling is a small amount of base funding, but we'll take what we can get and we'll try and improve upon it. Commissioner.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for that introduction, and thanks for inventing it. All of you invented the remote worker, and I want to introduce Kristen Zeider from our team, who has been there from the beginning in terms of coming up with how do we actually do this. So maybe should we put the language up on the, is David?
David's with us, and we'll hear from David certainly as we go through this, but yeah, if however you want, I think that would make sense because we're going to start getting into the nitty gritty on this one in terms of the changes. The bill is not all that complicated, but it's not all that simple either. So,
right. Yeah. So I don't know if he'll put it up or
Nathan should be able to help us.
Put it up. Yeah.
I need to pull the bill.
Do you want to do that, Nathan? Are you okay to do that?
Nathan, you're muted.
Whoops, sorry. Yes, I could pull it up real fast.
Thank you.
It's on our website, so you can just pull it up.
Great.
Do you need it bigger or smaller?
That's good.
And if you could just scroll down just a little bit. A little bit further. Okay.
So Joan, you're in charge here in
Yeah.
terms of telling Nathan what to do with the screen.
Yeah. I'll probably be telling you to scroll even a little bit further, although this is the kind of new language, which is that we would design and implement a new Vermont employee incentive program. I'm not sure that that's the right name for it, and perhaps it's relocated worker, just because, they're relocating to Vermont, and that's the key. That is the key, right? We want people to
Right.
relocate to the state, whether they work for their current employer out of state or whether they work for a Vermont employer. So just so that we don't have so many words, and I know that we probably called it that, but I think we're a proponent of saying a relocated worker incentive program.
Okay.
And if we could scroll a little further, that would be great. Stop there, that's perfect. So we have that the base grant will not exceed 5,000 except 7,500 for someone who becomes a resident in a labor market area in the state, which I still think is relevant because of the, kind of the mismatch of people moving to Chittenden County as opposed to any other county. And the labor market areas are already an established kind of protocol that Department of Labor puts out about which areas have higher average unemployment in the state and which areas have lower annual wage. So we think that that's still relevant and important. If you could scroll down further. Okay, this gets to the fun part. A simple certification process to certify qualifying new employees and qualifying expenses. That's fine. Promote awareness of the program, absolutely. And okay, so on number 3, award grants to qualifying new employees on a first come first served basis beginning January 1st, 2021. I think we need to get into the weeds a little bit on the dates, and that kind of bleeds into the discussion of, there will be people who are applying who we're going to run out of money soon, right? Do we want to give them? We probably want to give them some preference, even if they have to adapt to the new regs, whatever we decide these regs to be, if that makes sense. So for example, if we say January 1st, 2021, what about all the people that moved here in 2020? And shouldn't we grandfather them in, for lack of a better word? So I don't know about that date of January 1st, 2021. I would rather it be, we're kind of amending the previously issued programs, if that's possible. I don't know what the actual language should state, but basically it is, employees on a first come first served basis, subject to available funding. Those who applied in 2020 will not lose their place in line, however we want to word that, but that they
So
don't
maybe
lose their place.
it makes sense to take a brief pause here because I'm a little unclear as to, are there waiting lists now for these two programs? I think you've effectively shut down the remote worker program. Where have you heard a bunch of carping of people who had applied that you ran out of money and you told them that, and they moved anyhow, or they had moved in anticipation of getting? Just give us a little feel for what is out there right now in terms of money and waiting lists and people's reaction for.
Sure. And I'm going to defer a bit to Kristen on that. On new worker, I know that we have a bit of a waiting list. We did give people warning on the site that we think we have sufficient applications to spend down the remainder of the fund. So we issued sort of, there's no guarantee that there's funding left. However, we've still got applications. So I don't know, Kristen, if you just want to give a status on where we are. New worker, a remote worker is pretty much put to bed. I don't think we've had a lingering list of folks coming in saying, where's my money? Initially, that was probably true, but now these applications are probably 2 years old.
So in terms of, just to put remote worker to bed, I mean, we hope through this legislation, there will be money and the law to continue running that program at some level. But there were some people who applied, moved, and didn't get their money, but that's been a while now, and you haven't heard any ongoing complaints, so they just lost out. And
Yeah, there's,
it'd be a decision for this committee, I guess, a legitimate decision. Do we want to honor those in any way and tell you that of some of the money that you get, that you just give to people who are already here, which is not a real good use of the money other than maintaining our credibility, which I was very concerned with originally, but so much time has passed that maybe we should not look back any further on that.
Well,
program.
Michael, can I just tag on to that? I think my concern with that is that people who moved here before COVID, who were hoping for that grant, and maybe had moved here for that grant, I'm concerned about those few. And I know it's not necessarily a lot of them, a lot of people, but I think they bear consideration, as opposed to, quite honestly, I'm concerned about giving money to the COVID refugees who come here anyway. So for 2020, for me, I have concerns about that population, and they've afforded to be able to come here on their own. Part of me thinks this should begin, this year or even later this year, like July 1, and so that we don't have the net of COVID refugees who have the money and the means to have come anyway.
yeah, and let me clarify on that. The only exception are the people already on the waiting list. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not going to be open 2020. It'll be those who have applied in 2020.
Right. But Joe, weren't there
previously applied?
Right. Weren't there some remote workers who had applied before and we ran out of money? And were they all taken care of when we released that
No, they were not. They were not.
So, yeah, so I have concerns about those people, because a lot of them actually were intentional about coming and wanting to use that money, but we can. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
How many people are there that fall into that category, and how much money are we talking about?
On which category? The remote workers that got closed out?
That's the first piece, and also the second.
Okay, I'm not sure I have the remote workers that were closed out. Christian, I don't know if you have that handy as well.
The remote workers, there was a list, there was a queue of 90 applications that we were unable to fund. So just to give you some context, we funded 140 applicants with the 500,000 for that program. And then we had an additional 90 applications in queue.
And what about people who are in queue, if anything?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the beginning of that.
I'm sorry?
I didn't catch the beginning of the question.
What have we told the people, the 90 people who are in queue? Have we communicated with them? And if so, what did we tell them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that we would explore the possibility of additional funding, but beyond that, we didn't make any promises. When we marketed the program, we marketed the funding as first come, first serve. And it lasted just over a year, like a year and a week before we ran out of funding in that program. With new worker, when we realized, when we became fully subscribed, we put that message on the website, and people continued to apply. And then at the end of the year, we took down the application.
When you say for COVID, for the new workers, you put something up. What did you put up, and what were they told at that point, please?
We put a message on the website, which has a link to the application portal, that said, at this time, the applications are fully subscribed. We will continue to review, and there's no guarantee. If you apply, there's no guarantee of funding.
Okay.
Do you have a queue now for the new relocated worker program?
Yep, we are still working through the queue of applications.
Don't you still have some carry forward money for that program right now?
Yes.
Yeah, we have some.
Okay, so just give us an idea of how much you legally have to spend on this program and how many people, how many applications you have pending? Or, I mean, in the remote worker program, I remember the average grant was about 3,800 or something like that. I don't know if it was similar in the relocated worker program, but
Yeah.
just give us some numbers. Let me just back up. This date was just thrown in there
Mhm.
Right.
time of, at the time of
Understood.
drafting. I fully expect this date will change on line 17, but go
Yeah, I
ahead.
mean, the only point I wanted to bring up is just to honor those who are on the waiting list from 2020, not to accept people who moved here, had the wherewithal, and the people on the waiting list would have to abide by whatever it is that we changed in here.
Well, so I guess my question is how big is the waiting list? How much money is left and
Right.
why is there a waiting list?
Well, more people subscribe than what we had money for, and what's the queue now, Kristen?
There's, hang on a second here and I can look and see exactly. We had 670,000 to spend on the remote workers, and it looked like we were going to have a queue of about 30 applications after we
Sorry,
spent that.
is that, you just told us we had a queue of 90 on the remote worker. Is this new worker you're talking about?
Yeah, new worker.
Okay, so new worker, we have a queue of 30.
Yep, there's a roughly 30. And those would be applications that came in the fourth quarter of 2020, calendar year 2020.
So we have 90 in queue for remote worker, 30 in queue for new worker, and we still have some leftover money for the new worker.
Well, that we're finishing administering the applications.
So
So,
30 times 4,000 is only 120,000, right?
Approximately.
Right,
So you have plenty of money to pay the applications that are pending if we basically don't cover the remote workers. If I recall, the money that you had left over was ultimately only usable for the relocated workers who work for Vermont businesses. So, I mean, if we made the hard decision, I mean, it's hard in some cases, and just say we're not going to pay much more attention to the 90 people that are out there from a long time ago and just focus on these 30, pay them off, we'll still have like $500,000 to go towards this combined program whenever we start it.
No, sorry, that's incorrect. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think that's incorrect. I think the 30 is the estimation of who's going to be left without getting funding.
Oh, you have the 600
right.
people.
In other words, we've been funding all along, and what we're estimating, because we're still in process, is that there's going to be about 30 other people that we didn't even get to.
Right.
But we're estimating that we'll run out of money before then.
Okay, I got it.
So it's just the caveat of, as we're determining dates, how to honor that waiting list so as to avoid the situation where we feel like, we haven't, done the right thing by people.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Please, I'm sure you're a little confused at this point, Senator Ram. Go ahead.
A lot of questions, so I'll try to limit them right now. So this is a tax credit. So what is the income threshold for who would be eligible for this?
It's not a tax credit. It's actually a grant. It's a grant.
Okay, so what's the income eligibility for this?
So there is not income eligibility. What was set in here was a wage criteria.
Okay.
And that's another element that we'd like to change. So we set the wage criteria in new worker similar to the veggie wage criteria, which is 140 or 160% of minimum. I don't know if you want me to go in, do you want me to go into why we want that changed, or?
I do, but not, I want to finish this,
Okay.
this waiting list question.
Okay, that's fine.
Before we start mixing these, because it can get a little confusing. So right now, you have authority to continue the relocated worker. Just to be clear, relocator is different than remote. Relocated is people who work for Vermont businesses that come from out of state. To continue the relocated worker program, if we do nothing, you'll run about 30 people short. If we pump more money in through this bill or the budget process to cover right now the shortfall, you'll need about $120,000. Is that correct?
Approximately.
Okay. And then there'll be more money to run the program ongoing, whether it's through this law or through existing law, until you run out of that money, which will probably happen soon enough. Okay. I think I've got it. Okay, we can move on. We need to,
Get out a little.
I don't know why, in looking at this, and maybe David could jump in here. I don't know why we need a date at all. We have a
Well,
program that's going now, unless we're gonna have, I guess we're gonna change some provisions of the law. And so this new law would apply to new applications, new criteria, eligibility criteria, expense qualifying criteria, while
Right.
the other one, the existing applicants would fall under the other law. That may be a reason for the date.
Let me ask you a question, if I may.
Senator Brock.
The line that you have of people for the new workers program, and you're working through the processing of that right now. Is it correct that you would be looking at whether or not they are in fact working for or have a job offer from a Vermont employer as a criteria before granting them an award? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. They would have had to have moved here and started working here starting from January 1st, 2020.
Okay. And so if you get down through that list of 30 people and you find some of them are not currently working for a Vermont employer, would you then cease processing the application?
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of the application that the employer has to certify. The employer has to actually certify that this person is working for them.
Good, thank you.
Even though Senator Rahm, even though I asked you to hold your question in abeyance, I want to sort of respond so you're not going off on a potential tangent here. Most of the programs we deal with a lot of them are means tested to help people who are poor. This is not necessarily that kind of program. So, and the House pushed us on this last year on the new expansion. They wanted it only to go to people who are making, I don't want to say middle class, but wages over a certain factor. So they would contribute in terms of taxes back to this program, as opposed to, I know this is something that you care very much about, so I want to be clear on that right from the beginning. We weren't necessarily, it's an economic incentive program rather than a more traditional subsidy program that helps lower income people. So,
Chair, can I comment on that though?
Yeah, I mean, you might not like to hear that, but I just want to make sure you're
Yeah,
on.
no, I appreciate the context because I would have gone on a tangent in my brain.
But that is the context. However, again, the beauty of having been through this, there are employers and trade group particularly that has asked us to eliminate that wage requirement because they are unable to find employees, let's say in the retail environment. And why would we not pay somebody who is a lower wage earner to help them. They're precisely the people who have a hard time moving.
Right.
To me, that makes complete logical sense, which made us reconsider that clause. Like, why on earth would we put a limit when in fact higher wage earners could afford the move, whereas lower wage earners cannot?
And
And
it
the fact,
sounds like
yeah.
we don't even ask, which it would be hard to measure, but there are companies and higher level employers that pay you to move. And it sounds like
Absolutely.
it doesn't even, speak to companies that are paying people to move. They could still
Well,
get.
we do. We actually do. In the employer verification, they need to verify that these were unreimbursed expenses from the employer.
Okay.
So, there is that intent, but
Right. Still, even if you're just making a gesture, some people get a gesture. Most low-income workers, they're considered lucky to have gotten a job, so I have a lot of thoughts about it.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad that you said what you said, Joe. I mean, as I said, this came primarily from the House when we were in conference committee. We didn't have these kinds of wage restrictions, but I'm glad to hear that the department's moving in that direction. So,
so that is, so I don't know if we could scroll, Nathan, that would be great, unless you want to stay on that. But that was just the thoughts about the date, whether we need one, and how to honor the waiting list. And then the report, if you could scroll a little further. Okay. No, that's all fine. That, again, the date comes up again about should it be January 1st, or becomes a full-time resident, becomes a full-time employee of a business domiciled or authorized to do business in the state. This looks like it was taken from the new worker, so it's not really. Oh, I see. We're two different definitions. I'm sorry, I forgot for a moment that. Right now, Part C here is also very, very difficult. And actually, this is another contradiction. The long-term occupational projections of the Department of Labor, which I believe was also a House recommendation. In fact, there are retail clerks in those, as talking about the largest, projection of the need in the state, yet we weren't unable to pay them. So there's a contradiction in that. The other fact of the matter is that the title and the name of the occupation doesn't always match up with the person who moved here for a particular job. So we don't think that this list is useful for this purpose, right? If we agree that the purpose of this is to bring people into the state, to either bring their job with them or to work for a Vermont employer, if the employer had to hire from out of state, it means they could not find it in state. Like most of the people that we surveyed after having received the grant, they moved here for a job. And that's a good outcome. And so we don't think that this list is adding any value to this process. If anything, it adds another step. If it's not on the list, we have to do an exception. Fact of the matter is, we've granted many exceptions because they may not have, I don't know, there are a couple of arcane job titles, right? We're not going to say no to that person because basically they're coming here to fill a job that an employer could not find somebody for.
May I ask a question at this point? It's on that latter comment, Commissioner, that the employer could not find a job or a person in Vermont to fill that job. Is that a specific criteria that you test against?
We don't test against, it's just kind of, if they have the job posted on all the sites that are out there, and somebody moves from out of state, partly making an assumption, but generally speaking, if they were able to fill it internally, they would have filled it. So I know where you're going. Like, we haven't said, have you tried in Vermont? I mean, I think any employer we've ever spoken to about the lack of workforce in the state absolutely wants to hire Vermonters. There just aren't enough of them, and they had no luck. So if they are able to get somebody from out of state, I think we should encourage that.
Well, here's my problem with this bill at this time. As you know, I'm a supporter of this legislation. I think I reported it in the last session, and so I'm a strong supporter of it. But I am concerned about the worker coming into Vermont right now, and we now have an unemployment rate that still may be the lowest in the nation, but it's 1/3 higher than what we had when we started this. And do we have the optics of setting up a program in which we pay people to come from out of state and to compete with employees who are unemployed? I have a real problem with that. I've asked Ledge Council to draw up an amendment that we can perhaps, I hope, consider. And what the amendment would basically do is say that we would limit during the period of the pandemic, as a minimum, we would limit our use of this for people coming into the state for occupations where there is a critical shortage of employees, known critical shortage of employees, and not extended beyond that. I'm just very concerned that we're creating something that optically is not a good thing to do. Now, remote workers from out of state who are bringing jobs here that don't exist, that's an entirely different issue, and that I would strongly continue to support. And I'm just wondering what your comments might be.
Yeah, I understand your concern, and it was our concern really in the height of the pandemic about the optics on that. I think that, I guess we have to really analyze what is our overarching goal. Is our goal to create new taxpayers in Vermont? Is that more of the goal, or is more of the goal to increase the workforce? Arguably, both of them increase the number of people available to work. But generally, even if they're bringing their job from out of state, it's a new taxpayer to the state. Right. If they're coming into a job, let's say,
yes, I'd agree with you.
Yeah, let's say they come into
a job that exists in Vermont that is also available to a Vermont employee who is unemployed. Do we have a net gain?
Correct, but it's a tough thing to match those unemployed with perhaps another job that requires specific skills that isn't necessarily on this list. Do we really want to not have this apply to them? I mean, that is the fundamental question. Do we still want to incentivize that level of relocation? You know,
well, we certainly know that we have jobs in Vermont right now, that particularly jobs and job categories, nurses, for example, that we simply don't have enough people to fill those jobs. So those kinds of things are abundantly clear. And there probably are other jobs in which we know that our workforce is short, that regardless of the unemployment situation, even though it may be increased, we still are not able to fill those jobs. What I'm concerned about is the jobs for which there is not a critical shortage of employees. Is it the right thing to do to incentivize people to move here and compete with Vermonters who are unemployed in those occupations?
Yeah, I mean, and I guess you would get into an issue of what is critical shortage, but let me also just say that I think the other intent here in the governor's ask is that we are going to target the marketing of this to nursing, educators, and the tradesmen. I mean, those were the kind of the three buckets. Oh, and also veterans, right? So that we want to target some of our marketing and awareness of the program in those particular trade groups. But, you know, when you talk to groups of employers and you try to really put one occupation above another that's in critical need, you know, it may not be the total amount of jobs, but it's still a critical need for that particular, let's say operators or machine mechanics. That is a critical need, even if the total, you know, number of projections, if you will, are not as high as, let's say, others. So it becomes really difficult when you say define where do we have an overage of people. I couldn't name one industry where we're flush, maybe lawyers, but you know, I don't know. It is a problem, whether it's healthcare, whether it's manufacturing, retailers,
right.
You know.
And Joan, may I just jump in here? I know we can't see each other all, but I would remind us that we are in the process of extending the ability to stay unemployed because you want to stay unemployed or have to because of COVID. So there are, I think that there are people who are unemployed who aren't going to be applying for those jobs until the pandemic is coming. So I think this is absolutely, we want new Vermonters. I mean, I think one of our key things is to grow our workforce and attract new Vermonters and new taxpayers. I think that is a lot of the incentive motive behind this bill. And I think right now it's very hard to equate people who are unemployed and with people who are either skilled or wanting to go back to work, because during the pandemic, that's not necessarily an equation you can make.
Okay, so I'm going to try and move the conversation along because I want to at least get through the
Okay.
concerns that the administration has
Sure.
in mind, Senator. This, what you see before, even though it's all underscored, I think it's basically existing law right now. No, it's not existing law. It's the bill that passed out a couple of years ago. Some of these sections are existing law, like the long-term occupational projections of furnace is already existing law. I think in response to Senator Brock's concern, it's a valid concern. I think there are a number of ways to make the situation better that we need to explore, in terms of qualifying. But I'm not sure just specifically saying certain classifications are the only ones where you can qualify is targeted enough in some ways. But we'll talk more about it. But
Okay.
there's not a lot of money for this program, so we want it to go where it's mostly needed. So
well, with the stimulus, there may be more money.
Maybe. Okay,
If
let's
you
go on.
could scroll a little bit. Okay, so receives gross wages for the position that equal or exceed. This is where we want to eliminate that wage requirement for the purposes we just discussed about, people making less than that really do need the help to relocate into the state, and the retailers do need workers. And so let's pay attention to that. If we could scroll a little bit more, we had the 160 or 140, and that was dependent, the same criteria that we have on veggie. Then it goes on to describe new remote worker, which is taken from the remote worker language, right? And that's for people coming to the state who work for an employer outside. That's fine. I think we still want the co-working space in there because that was, we part of the issue here was we wanted to make sure people were actually utilizing the co-working spaces and making them more sustainable. If we could scroll a little bit down. Okay, qualifying expenses is the next area. So what's the right way to explain this? We want to really pare it down to relocation expense, period, full stop. On new worker, the current legislation has us determining whether or not equipment that they need for their job is necessary. And then we're placed in this weird position of determining whether or not a particular occupation needed equipment in Vermont that, let's say, they didn't need in Massachusetts. It's not really helpful. And I don't think you're seeing it on here, but anyway, that's one change we'd like to make. The other is on the remote worker. We don't really want to pay people who had a second home and then decided to move here full time.
Right.
There are applications where we've had difficulty. They don't have any moving expenses, and there's some wild explanation about why they don't. We don't want to do that. We really want to give this to people who need the relocation expense. So we want to limit it. With connectivity costs, you have people buying new computers. Like, we really don't want to get in that business of determining that just because they moved to Vermont, now they need this whole new setup.
When you analyze the data, so we've already passed by above the relocated workers, and I assume I didn't pay much attention to it, but we also have qualifying expenses for that program, right? Or is this now going to be qualifying expenses for both programs?
This is for both, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so
you want to limit it to relocation expenses for both programs. There was some distinction as to what was covered between the two programs currently.
Right. I mean, it would be simple if it was just relocation expense.
What does your numbers show you in terms of, if the average grant under these programs has been $3,600 or $3,800, how much of that is generally relocation expenses? If I recall, it's most of them.
Most of it, but it's the minority, that small minority of people that have like some equipment, or it takes inordinate amounts of time from staff to go through and try to prove out what the heck happened. I don't know, Kristen, maybe you want to talk about that. But most of them are relocation. We would get the lion's share of folks. That's where the need is, because it's expensive to move.
Okay, let's go on.
But sorry, just before we leave, I wouldn't want to get, there are some, you can think of reasons that equipment, if you have a disabled person who's moving here, I mean, I can think of legitimate equipment needs for a job that, coming here that we might not have. So I wouldn't want to cut that out altogether. So I'd like to discuss that further.
I agree with that. I understand that. It's just, you have to see some of the applications. People are sending us a list of, all of their equipment that they use for their job. And I had to question, well, wait a minute, don't they need this in Rhode Island?
Right.
Like,
no, I get that.
Yeah.
So I got to add a little levity here. Maybe we should put a but-for test in on the expense.
Yeah, because
Why
that's
not?
so easy.
Yeah, right.
Okay, I like the levity. That's good. So that was, and we really don't want to pay second homeowners. I know that just sounds so, but there are situations where that's the case, and they obviously don't need our funds to help them relocate to the state. So we almost want to make that except for, if you already previously had a residence here part-time, something like that. I don't know if you're allowed to, but whatever. We have to make sure this is geared to people who, want to move here. It's expensive to move. They need the help. So, all right.
One question I have on that, I don't know if somebody else has a question, but is there any thought given to the comment about, we've seen a lot of people who have moved here because of COVID? I mean, in the queue that you have now, do you sense that people are really primarily moving here because of COVID and the job is secondary? Or I don't know if I'm articulating that correctly.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't have a view on that, Kristen. I don't know if you do. You're much closer to it. Most of the people that answered the survey were like, they came here for a job. But go ahead.
Yeah, most of the surveys that we've seen are people saying that they came here because of a job offer and because of the access to outdoor recreation. Those are the two things that we see most often, and that it's a safe place to live and raise a family. So that could cross over into, COVID refugees, but we also saw that with remote worker. That was also one of the top reasons there too. So I don't think
your surveys are mostly not with people. Your surveys are mostly with people who haven't moved here since COVID. They're pre-COVID, aren't they mostly?
No, we've awarded 133 new worker grants, and most of them, all but probably like 20 or 30, were since the pandemic. The beginning from like January to May is the slower time for application submittals, and then it picks up throughout the summer and fall months.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Rob?
So I think maybe it's, you'd rather sort of leave it vague and make the decisions within agency guidelines. I think this is an area where I would really like to hear, if we haven't, from people with really specific needs around moving to Vermont, specifically people from marginalized communities and people with disabilities. I would put them in a category to receive that kind of enhanced benefit. That there are huge barriers for those kinds of folks to move here, whether it's outfitting a property so that they are able to access it. Or, I mean, for folks who don't know, if you have a particular kind of hairstyle, you might have to pay someone from Boston to come up here to do your hair. I mean, I think we should be really cognizant that this is an area where we could make even more of a welcoming statement to people who face a lot of additional burdens to move here, because it's a state that doesn't have a lot of resources, particularly if you're from an ethnic group that's underrepresented here.
Appreciate the comment. We do have to keep things, I think, when I hear that, I think more of how we're going to integrate something like this with the programs in terms of housing and making housing more affordable. We do need to keep this in perspective in terms of the amount of money that's out there for this program. It's so little. That we could.
It is.
I just want I appreciate the comment, and we definitely need to think about this in terms of all our housing money as well.
Right. This may be a good stopping spot.
Well, let's see
Mr.
if we can
Chair.
just quickly.
Yeah, I just want to add that the governor's recommend is that we have a set aside of $100,000 in this program to previously underrepresented groups. And so that would be another thing we'd want to add in here, that the 100,000 is for underrepresented groups. And if you want to make it that there's this additional thing, we could put that into that context. The 100,000 set aside would be something that we, keep separate, but then if it's not utilized by whatever, 3 months before year end or something, it could blend into the regular pool. But that was our intent, that there would be 100,000 set aside. Okay. You want to scroll down?
Yep.
And we need time to do our planning work.
Right. And I want to talk to the committee a little bit afterwards too.
Right. Right. So I see that it says new worker, the new remote worker, the actual cost the new worker incurs. Again, if we wanted to keep broadband access, since that is such a problem, we can keep that, but computer software and hardware, I just feel like it's too open.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's continue down and implementation, funding, and transition. Okay, single program, right? Okay, scroll down, please. Thanks. Oh, I see. So I see we've handled the transition somewhat.
I think, Joan, this is all kind of technical in terms of how we transition in, and we can work through that
Okay.
offline. Okay, I think we've got your major concerns. It's now 11:35. So I want to thank you all. We'll have you back next week, hopefully, to do markup on this, and we'll see where it goes. Thank you, Kristen and Joan. I'm just going to, can we go